as Dan Tom exits, we make room for the Boston shot caller, Nolan King, who was a recent nominee at the World MMA Awards for Best Journalist. How you doing, Nolan? Is the eclipse headed your
Good,
way
man.
too?
Yeah. I think Dan, Tom, and I were wearing the same shirt here. I was thinking about changing, but black tee can't go wrong. But UFC 300 fight week it doesn't get better or bigger than this, right?
One of the guys from your neck of the woods, Calvin Kattar. You know, like we've been talking more about Aljamain Sterling and his move up to 145. Look, respect. This guy really approached being maybe the GOAT of bantamweight before he got stopped by O'Malley. That's what we were all saying. He had 3 title defenses and everything. So it's exciting to see him go to a new frontier. But same thing, I guess, that maybe we talked about with Cody Brundage. Are we overlooking Calvin Kattar? You're close to that camp. You in proximity. What do you think, man? What's this guy's approach going to be all about this, with the hype being more on the Sterling side?
It's a bit of a different matchup, I think, than Calvin's faced in the UFC. So I'm very interested to see how his ground game is. I feel like it's a part of his game that we really haven't seen a ton of. I think there's been some rounds here and there where it's hit the ground, but predominantly he doesn't fight guys that are going to want to drag him down. And predominantly we don't see him have to use some of his defensive tools and his defensive wrestling. So there's a little bit of a fuzziness or unknown there, but I do think that overall this is a pretty big fight at 145 that I think's being fairly overlooked here. I mean, anytime somebody shifts weight classes, particularly moving up, you don't really know where they're going to fit, right? Like Aljamain Sterling's body type, he's always been a guy that's had to cut a lot of weight. But does that mean that he'll have success up at 145? You know, against a top 10 guy, against top 5 guys in a title fight scenario? This is really we're going to learn a lot about Aljamain Sterling on Saturday, and I just think this fight's being so overlooked. This division is awesome. I think we can all agree whenever there's ranked featherweights on a card, you're pretty much going to get an exciting fight. You're going to get a meaningful fight. You're going to see high-level skills. But it's also a really weird division, right? Like, I feel like it's very hard, especially at this point in time, for anybody to have any sort of momentum. If you look at these guys like, Ortega and Yair, even Volkanovski coming off a loss. I believe there's only 4 fighters in the top 15 that are coming off of multi-fight win streaks, which are coming off win streaks. I think it's Max, Evoliev, Topuria, Lerone Murphy, and maybe actually Edson Barbosa. There's actually 5, but it's just hard for people to gain momentum. So I think people are kind of overlooking what's on the line here for both guys. I mean, Calvin Kattar's coming off of a very controversial loss to Josh Emmett, a knee injury in his fight against Arnold Allen. And he really hasn't fought the guys that are sitting at the top of the division, the Topurias of the world, the Volkanovskis of the world, Yair, Ortega. There's a lot of fresh matchups for him. So if he goes out there, he beats Aljamain Sterling, I think he puts himself in a potential title eliminator situation. And same thing for Aljo. Like, I'm not a big fan of people cutting the line or jumping to the front when they move up a division, but this division's just in a place right now where it's just kind of up for grabs. So I think it's a big fight for both guys. And I think people are, like all the fights on the prelims, right? People are kind of overlooking the stakes of this one.
Was it more the right move for Sterling because it was just tough to make 35? Or was it because the whole teammate thing with Merab?
I think both, man. I think there was just a lot of boxes that were checked here. When he announced that he officially was going up, I mean, I love the move. Like, I think sometimes people are too reactive. If this was, another timeline where he and O'Malley fought close 5-round fight and it was a split decision and Merab didn't exist, like, sure, like a guy that had a pretty dominant reign at bantamweight, I think is right in that conversation to either have an immediate rematch, maybe sit on the shelf for a little bit, have Sean fight, and then he gets the rematch, or, fight once there and then fight for the title. But I think this is just a really smart move for Aljo. We heard him talking about the weight class issue before he even lost the belt. So I think it is something that's been hindering him a bit. So I just love the move all around. I think it checks a lot of boxes.
Can Sterling net himself a title shot if he wins and wins impressively, bearing in mind that Volk doesn't like to A, not fight, and B, not have a gold around his waist? And then you got Max Holloway, who could do something spectacular too, and then just go, all right, deuces, I'm going back to 45 because Volk's no longer there. So there's a lot to consider here. How big of a moment can this be for Sterling?
Well, first of all, it'd have to be a really, really impressive performance, right? Because you look at a guy like Davidson Figueiredo, he went from flyweight to bantamweight, and he got a very solid win, and none of us really felt like even mentioning that, right? So it's got to be something really big, like come out and KO Calvin Kattar, something like that. But even then, I'd still be shocked because if you look at Aljamain Sterling's career, he hasn't really been a guy that the UFC does a lot of favors for. Traditionally, his roads are kind of tough to the title. So I would probably say no. It seems like that would be a lot.
What do you think, Danny? Is how big of a fight is this for Sterling in your eyes? There's a lot of leapfrogging he can do, but you know, when you're a former champ, sometimes you get those shots.
Hell yeah. If you're a former champ, I mean, that gets you into a lot of places, into a lot of opportunities that maybe other more deserving contenders wouldn't get. I do think that if Aljamain Sterling wins here, I do think he could get a potential shot against Topuria. I think people are overlooking his chances of fighting for
Really?
the belt. Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. I mean, he's a former champ. He's the most dominant champion we've ever seen at 135 in the UFC. He gets a victory over a top 10 guy. I think that's worthy of a title shot. Now, I know Holloway's there, but Holloway could very much lose to Gaethje. Volkanovski, you know, there's that potential rematch as well, but they're also going to his side of the world as well, so they might use him for another fight. I do think a good promo here, a good solid win, he can get a title shot off that. And look, I think Aljamain Sterling, Nolan and I were there in Boston for UFC 292. I think Aljamain Sterling is a fantastic B-side. And I mean that as a compliment because everybody wants to be the A-side. But playing kind of like the heel and propping up the main guy, he does that well. And I think against Topuria, he will do he could definitely sell a fight. I think that's a fight that interests Topuria as well. Topuria has told me, I got grappling and I want to show that. I've yet to show it, but I want to show that as well. And who better against than Aljamain Sterling? So I think this is a phenomenal matchup for Sterling's debut. And I do think there's a lot on the line for him. So yeah, I absolutely love it. And I think it's the right move too, like 145. Look, we got Deiveson Figueiredo in the prelims trying to reinvent himself at 36 years of age in a new weight class. I think we can all agree it's not ideal to be at that age trying to, seek a second title. I think right now, 34, the weight cuts are tough. I talked to Diego Lopez a few days ago. He told me he's grappled and trained in Vegas with Aljamain Sterling and feels him very much like a featherweight. Dude, I think he could be, this could be a nice chapter of his career if all goes well for him on Saturday night.
All right. Now, you've kind of said a lot of things that almost lead me to think that you think Sterling's winning.
I think Sterling is winning. Yeah. And I do think there's a chance that he gets the title shot here.
I got Calvin Kattar in this one, man. I think it's a little bit too big. I think the power, I'll go with Kattar.
He can stop the takedowns, Goes?
I think so.
Okay. Boston shot collar, New England guys, they hang tight. Shot collars work for cartels. I don't want to make any connections here. What are your thoughts?
You're setting me up for some to get kicked out of here with all that hype. No, I'm actually leaning with Aljamain Sterling. There were two when Matt Erickson sent out our staff picks email this week. There were two fights that I'm like, I might end up switching. I might end up sending that last minute email that I'm switching my pick. This was one of them. But at this point in time, I'm going with Aljamain.